Everybody say smile. Everybody smile. We got a rehearsal here of the Confessions of Nat Turner. And this is Sunday, November. Somebody help me out. 21st?
Checking.
Ah, I did it.
Yeah, 22nd.
Is it 22nd? All day long, huh? Okay, alrighty. That promise I've made about turning this into a script, I may have to break my promise, guys. My goal is to still do it, but it didn't happen yet. So, I'm going to shoot some promo stuff with Darlene and leave you guys to yourselves for this rehearsal at this point. Okay, I will show up once I finish the promos. You're on.
Great. Agreeable to his own appointment, on the evening he was committed to prison with permission of the jailer, I visited Nat on Tuesday, the 1st of November, when, without being questioned at all, he commenced his narrative in the following words.
Sir, you have gave me give a history of my motive, which induced me to undertake the late insurrection, as you called it. To do so, I must go back to the days of my infancy, and even before I was born. I was 31 years of age, the 2nd of October last, and born the property of Benjamin Turner of this county. In my childhood, a circumstance occurred which made an indelible impression on my mind and laid the groundwork of that enthusiasm, which has terminated so fatally to what did you say?
I said so fatally. You'd said too fatally.
Oh, many, both white and black, and for which I am about to atone the gallows. The gallows. Atone at the gallows. It is here necessary to relate this circumstance. Trifling as it may seem, it was the commencement of that belief which was grown with time. And even now, sir, in this dungeon, helpless and forsaken as I am, I cannot devise myself of.
Divest.
What was I?
All right. Line. I guess.
I cannot divest myself of. Being at play with other children, when 3 or 4 years old, I was telling them something, which my mother overhearingly, saying it had happened before I was born. I stuck to my story, however, and related some things, which went, in her opinion, to confirm it. Others being called on were greatly astonished. Knowing that these things had happened and caused them to say in my hearing, I surely would be a prophet, as the Lord has shown me things that had happened before my birth. And my father and mother strengthened me in this my first impression, saying in my presence I was intended for some great purpose, which they had always thought for certain marks on my head and breast.
A parcel of excrescences which I believe are not at all uncommon, particularly among Negroes, as I have seen several with the same. In this case, he has either cut them off or they have nearly disappeared.
My grandmother, who was very religious, and to whom I was much attached, my master, who belonged to the church, and other religious persons who visit the house, and when I often saw at prayers, noticing the singularity of my manners, I suppose my uncommon intelligence for a child remarked I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was, I would never be of any service to anyone as a slave. To a mind like mine, restless, inquisitive, and observant of everything that was passing, it is easy to suppose that religion was the subject to which it would be directed. And although this subject principally occupied my thoughts, there was nothing that I saw or heard of to which my attention was not directed. The manner in which I learned to read and write not only had great influence on my own mind, as I acquired it with the most perfect ease, so much so that I have no recollection whatsoever of learning the alphabet.
But to the astonishment of the family, one day when a book was shown him to keep him from crying, he began spelling the names of different objects. This was a source of wonder to all in the neighborhood, particularly the blacks, and this learning was constantly improved at all opportunities.
When I got large enough to go to work while employed, I was reflecting on many things that would present themselves to my imagination. And whenever an opportunity occurred of looking at a book when the school children were getting their lessons, I would find many things that the fertility of my own imagination had depicted to me before all my time, not devoted to my master's service, was spent either in prayer or in making experiments and casting different things in molds made of earth, in attempting to make paper, gunpowder, and many other experiments that, although I could not perfect, yet convinced me of its practicability if I had the means.
Practicability.
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 Is there wrong? We're saying it's practicability.
It's missing several syllables. Practicability.
Isn't that the same meaning?
I don't think so. I don't think practicability is an actual word.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up. Practicability. If I had the means, I was not.
They gave me that one. They gave me the section. He was not addicted to stealing in his youth, nor had he ever been. Yet such was the confidence of the Negroes in the neighborhood, even at this early period of his life, in his superior judgment, that they would often carry him with them when they were going on any roguery to plan for them. Growing up among them with this confidence in his superior judgment, and when this, in their opinions, was perfected by divine inspiration from the circumstances already alluded to in his infancy, and which belief was ever afterwards zealously inculcated by the austerity of his life and manners, which became the subject of remark by white and black.
Having soon discovered to be great, I must appear so, and therefore studiously avoided mixing in society, and wrapped myself in mystery, devoting my time to fasting and prayer. By this time,
having arrived to man's estate and hearing the scriptures commented on at meetings, he was struck with that particular passage which says,
"Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you." I reflected much on this passage and prayed daily for light on this subject. As I was praying one day at my plow, the Spirit spoke to me, saying, "Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you."
What do you mean by the Spirit?
The Spirit that spoke to the prophet in former days. And I was greatly astonished, and for 2 years prayed continuously, whenever my duty would permit. And then again, I had the same revelations, which fully confirmed me in the impression that I was ordained for some great purpose in the hands of the Almighty. Several years rolled round, in which many events occurred to strengthen me in this my belief. At this time, I reverted in my mind to the remarks made of me in my childhood, and the things that had been shown me, and as it had been said of me in my childhood by those by whom I had been taught to pray, both white and black, and in whom I had the greatest confidence, that I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was, I would never be of any use to anyone as a slave. Now, finding I had arrived to man's estate and was a slave, and these revelations began being made known to me, I began to direct my attention to this great object, to fulfill the purpose for which by this time, I felt assured I was intended. Knowing the influence I had obtained over the minds of my fellow servants, nor by the means of conjuring and such tricks, for them I always spoke of such things with contempt. But by the communion of the spirits through revelations, I often communicated to them, and they believed and said my wisdom came from God. I now begun to prepare them for my purpose by telling them something that was about to happen that would terminate in fulfilling the great promise that had been made to me.
About this time he was placed under an overseer, from whom he ran away, and after remaining in the woods 30 days, he returned, to the astonishment of the Negroes on the plantation, who thought he had made his escape to some other part of the country, as his father had done before.
That just makes him sound ignorant in my mind, but I'm gonna go off of that today. I'm gonna bring that up later.
Well, no, it makes sense. I mean,
No, I'm talking about the word terminate. Happened that would terminate in fulfilling the great promise that had been made to me. Why use the word terminate?
it's a fancy word for end, result in.
Terminate is not a fancy word for end. It's just end. Terminate means something completely different. Maybe it's just me, but yeah, I just don't like the way that's worded at all. I returned to the astonishment of hold on, where were you? Had done before.
Yeah.
But the reason for my return was that the Spirit appeared to me and said I had my wishes directed to the things of this world and not to the kingdom of heaven, and that I should return to the service of my earthly master. For he who knoweth his master's will and doubteth is not, doeth is not, shall be beaten with many stripes. Shall be beaten with many stripes. For he who knoweth,
Okay, yeah, it's still your line.
For he who knoweth his master's will and doubteth is not, shall be beaten with many stripes. Stripes. I don't know why I want to play scripts so bad there. Ooh, chicken scripts. And by chastening you, the Negroes found fault and murmured against me, saying that if they had my sense, they would not serve any master in the world. And about this time, I had a vision, and I saw white spirits and black spirits, black spirits engaged in battle, and the sun was darkened, the thunder rolled in the heavens, and blood flowed in the streams. And I heard a voice saying,
Such is your luck, you are called to see. Such is your luck, such you are called to see, and let it come rough or smooth, you must surely bear it.
I now withdrew myself as much as my situation would permit from the intercourse of my fellow servants for the avowed purpose of serving the spirits more fully. And it appeared to me and reminded me of the things that had already shown me, and that it would then reveal to me the knowledge of the elements and the revolution of the planets, the operations of tides, and the changing of the seasons.
After this revelation in the year 1825, and the knowledge of the elements being made known to him, he sought more than ever to obtain true holiness before the great day of judgment should appear.
The programming that you are watching now.
And then I begun to receive the true knowledge of faith. And from the first steps of righteousness until the last was I made perfect, and the Holy Ghost was with me and said, behold me as I stand in the heavens. And I looked and saw the forms of men in different altitudes. And there in different attitudes. And there were lights in the sky to which the children of darkness gave others names than what they really were. For they were the lights of the Savior's hands, stretched forth from east to west, even as they were extended on the cross of Calvary for the redemption of sinners. And I wondered greatly at these miracles and prayed to be informed of a certainty of the meaning thereof. And shortly afterward, while laboring in the field, I discovered drops of blood on the corn as though it was dew from heaven. And I communicated it to many, both white and black, in the neighborhood. And then I found on the leaves in the woods hieroglyphic characters, and I portrayed in numbers, my fault, with the forms of men in different attitudes, portrayed in blood, and representing the figures I had seen before in the heavens. And now the Holy Ghost hath revealed itself to me and made plain the miracles it has shown me. For as the blood of Christ had been shed on this earth and had ascended to heaven for the salvation of sinners, and I was now returning to earth again in the form of dew. And as the leaves on the trees bore the impression of the figures I had seen in the heavens, it was plain to me that the Savior was about to lay down the yoke he had borne of the sin of man, and a great day of judgment was at hand. About this time, I told these things to a white man,
Ethel T. Bradley,
on whom it had a wonderful effect. And he ceased from his wickedness and was attacked immediately with a cutaneous eruption, and blood oozed from the pores of his skin. And after praying and fasting 9 days, he was healed. And the Spirit appeared to me again and said, as the Savior had been baptized, so shall we be also. And when the white people would not let us be baptized by the church, we went down into the water together in the sight of many who reviled us, and were baptized by the Spirit. After this, I rejoiced greatly and gave thanks to God. And on the 12th of May, 1828, I heard a loud noise in the heavens, and the Spirit instantly appeared to me and said, the serpent was loosened, and Christ had laid down the yoke he had borne for the sins of man, and that I should take it on and fight against the serpent, for the time was fast approaching when the first shall be last and the last shall be first.
do you not find yourself mistaken now?
And by some, oh, hold on, I didn't answer your question. Say that again.
Do you not find yourself mistaken now?
Was not Christ crucified? And by the signs in the heavens that will that will that would make known to me when I should commence the great work. And until the first sign appeared, I shall conceal it from the knowledge of man. And on the appearance of the sign,
The eclipse of the sun last February,
I should arise and prepare myself and slay my enemies with their own weapons. And immediately on the sign appearing in the heavens, the seal was removed from my lips, and I communicated the great work laid out for me to do. To four in whom I had the greatest confidence, Henry, Hart, Nelson, and Sam. It was intended by us to have begun the work of death on the 4th July last. Many were the plans formed and rejected by us, and it affected my mind so much, to such a degree that I felt sick. And the time passed without our coming to any determination how to commence, still forming new schemes and rejecting them when the sign appeared again, which determined me not to wait longer. Since the commencement of 1830, I had been living with Mr. Joseph Travis, who was to me a kind master and placed the greatest confidence in me. In fact, I had no cause to complain of his treatment to me.
on Saturday evening, the 20th of August, it was agreed between Henry, Hart, and Nat to prepare a dinner in the next day for the men they expected, and then to consider a plan as they had not yet determined on any. Hart, on the following morning, brought a pig, and Henry brandy, and being joined by Sam, Nelson, Will, and Jack, prepared in the woods for a dinner.
Well, about 3 o'clock, I joined them.
Why were you so backward in joining them?
The same reason that has caused me not to mix with them for years before. I wonder what that reason was.
And the Union General there, Benjamin
He
Butler,
was just,
gave
he
them.
didn't like them. He was putting on airs as a mysterious and above it all guy. Whether that was purely tactical or whether he really thought he better than these clowns.
If he thought he was better than them, he would never put the confidence in them to begin with.
Escape from their owner and awkward, make their way across the river to Fort Monroe.
Matter of fact, he would have never associated.
They didn't use that.
Well, I mean, socially he associated with them as little as possible.
The Union General, Benjamin Butler, refused their return, and at this point put them on federal payroll, which put them on the tax citizen.
I saluted them on coming up and asking Will, how came he here? He answered, his life was worth no more than others, and his liberty is dear to him. I asked him if he thought to obtain it. He said he would or lose his life. This was enough to put him in full confidence. Jack, I knew, was only a tool in the hands of Hart. It was quickly agreed that we should commence at home. Mr. Mr. J. Travis's. On that night, and until we had armed, and do you want to take that part?
Well,
We are advocating for Fort Monroe.
well, I'll say Mr. J. Travis, and then
Right, that's what I'm saying.
okay, Mr. J. Travis.
On that night, and until we had armed and equipped ourselves and gathered sufficient force, nor age nor sex will be spared.
Which was invariably adhered to.
We remained at the feast until about 2 hours in the night, when we went to the house and found Austin. They all went to the cider press and drank, except myself.
On returning to the house, Hawk went to the door with an axe for the purpose of breaking it open, as they were strong enough to murder. As they knew they were strong enough to murder the family if they were awakened by the noise, but reflecting that it might create an alarm in the neighborhood, they determined to enter the house secretly and murder them while sleeping.
Hart got a ladder and set it against the chimney, on which I ascended, and hoisting the window, entered and came downstairs, unbarred the door, and removed the guns from their places. It was then observed that I might have to spill the first blood. On which, armed with a hatchet and accompanied by Will, I entered my master's chambers. It being dark, I could not give a death blow. The hatchet glanced from his head. He sprung from the bed and called his wife,
Whose name remains unrecorded by history.
It was his last words. Will laid him dead with a blow of his axe, and Mrs. Travis shared the same fate as she lay in bed.
The murder of this family, 5 in number, was the work of a moment, and not one of them awoke.
Hi, my name is Sherry Bailey. I'm the founder of JuneteenthVA.
Oh, my fault. There was a little infant sleeping in a cradle that was forgotten until we had left the house and gone some distance. When Henry and Will returned and killed it, we got here 4 guns that would shoot and several old muskets with a pound or 2 of powder. We remained some time at the barn where we paraded. I formed them in the line as soldiers, and after carrying them through all the maneuvers I was master of, marching them off to Mr. Francis, about 600-yard distance.
Sam and Will went to the door and knocked. Mr. Francis asked who was there. Sam replied it was him, that he had a letter for him, on which he got up and came to the door. They immediately seized him, and dragging him out a little from the door, he was dispatched by repeated blows on the head. There was no other white person in the family. They started from there for Mrs. Reese's, maintaining the most perfect silence on their march, where, finding the door unlocked, they entered and murdered Mrs. Reese in her bed while sleeping. Her son awoke, but it was only to sleep the sleep of death. He had only time to say, "Who is that?" and he was no more.
From Mrs. Reese's, we went to Mr. Turner's a mile distance, which we reached about sunrise on Monday morning. Harry, Austin, and Sam went to the still, where finding Mrs. Peoples. Austin shot him, and the rest of us went to the house. As we approached, the family discovered us and shut the door. Vainhope Will, with one stroke of his axe, opened it, and we entered and found Mrs. Turner and Mrs. Newsom in the middle of the room, almost frightened to death. Will killed Mrs. Turner with one blow of his axe. I took Mrs. Newsom by the hand, and with the sword I had when I was apprehended, I struck her several blows over the head, but not being able to kill her as the sword was dull. Will, turning around and discovering it, dispatched her also. I was laughing at the way I said Vain Hope.
All right. A general destruction of property in search for money and ammunition always succeeded the murders. By this time, Turner's company amounted to 15, and 9 men mounted, who started for Mrs. Whitehead's. The other 6 were to go through by way of Mr. Bryant's, and rejoin the main party at Mrs. Whitehead's.
As we approached the house, we discovered Mr. Richard Whitehead standing in the cotton patch near the lane fence. We called him over into the lane, and Will, the executioner, was near at hand, and his fatal axe to send him to the untimely grave. As we pushed on to the house, I discovered someone running around the garden, and thinking it was some of the White family, I pursued them, but finding it was a servant girl belonging to the house. I returned to commence the work of death, but they whom I left had not been idle. All the family were already murdered, but Mr. Whitehead and her daughter Margaret, but Mrs. Whitehead and her daughter Margaret. As I came round to the door, I saw Will pulling Mrs. Whitehead out of the house, and at the step he nearly severed her head from her body with his broad axe. Miss Margaret, when I discovered her, had concealed herself in the corner formed by the projection of the cellar cap from the house. On my approach, she fled, but was soon overtaken, and after repeated blows with a sword, I killed her by blowing her head with a fence rail.
By this time, the 6 who had gone by Mr. Bryant's rejoined them and informed them that they had done the work of death assigned them. They again divided, part going to Mr. Richard Porter's, and from thence to Nathaniel Francis's, the others to Mr. Howell Harris's and Mr. T. Doyle's.
Join us. We want to hear your stories as well as.
On my reaching Mr. Porter's, he had escaped with his family. I understood there that the alarm had already spread, and I immediately returned to bring up those sent to Mr. Doyle's and Mr. Harris. The party I left going on to Mr. Francis, having told them I would join them in that neighborhood. I met these sent to Mr. Doyle and Mr. Harris returning. Having met Mr. Doyle on the road and killing him,
I'm sorry, I've lost my place.
Oh, no, it's not you. I'm trying to understand something. I thought he committed one murder, but it seemed like he killed Mr. Doyle too.
My name is JuneteenthVA. I'm the founder of JuneteenthVA. Our mission is to help America heal the wounds of slavery without shame or blame. This is difficult history that we believe is important for us.
The group that separated and killed Mr. Doyle's on the road.
Okay. Mr. Doyle on the road and killing him, and learning from some who joined them that Mr. Harris was from home, I immediately pursued the course taken by the party going on before, but knowing they would complete the work of death and pillage, at Mr. Francis. Before I could get there, I went to Mr. Pete Edwards, expecting to find them there, but they had been here also. I then went to Mr. John T. Barrows, where they had been here and murdered him. I pursued on their tracks to Captain Dewitt Harris, where I found the greater part mounted and ready to start. The men, now amounting to about 40, shouted and hurrahed as I rode up. Some were in the yard, loading their guns, others drinking.
Captain Harris and his family had escaped. The property in the house the rebels destroyed, robbing him of money and other valuables.
I ordered them to mount and march instantly. This was about 9 or 10 o'clock Monday morning. I proceeded to Mr. Waller's, two or 3 miles distance. I took my station in the rear, and as it was my object to carry terror and devastation wherever we went, I placed 14 or 20 of the best armed and most to be relied on in front, who generally approached the houses as fast as their horses could run. This was for 2 purposes: to prevent their escape and to strike terror in the inhabitants.
On this account, Nat never got to the houses after leaving Mrs. Whitehead's until the murders were committed, except in one case.
I sometimes got in sight in time to see the work of death completed, viewed the mangled bodies as they lay in the silent sophistication and satisfaction, and immediately started. I hope they lay in silent sophistication and satisfaction, and immediately started in quest of other victims. Having murdered Mrs.
I take that one.
Oh.
Having murdered Mrs. Waller and 10 children, they started for Mr. William Williams. Having killed him and 2 of the boys that were there, while engaged in this, Mrs. Williams fled and got some distance from the house, but she was pursued, overtaken, and compelled to get up behind one of the company, who brought her back, and after showing her the mangled body of her lifeless husband, she was told to get down and lay by his side, where she was shot dead.
Within days of that happening, in May of 1865, you had Black folks showing up at Fort Monroe, which was renamed Freedom Fort, and there became a contraband camp there.
Will we?
That by 1865, the end of the Civil War, housed about 10,000 people.
I knew that. I then started to Mr. Jacob Williams, where the family was murdered. Here we found a young man named Drury. Yeah. Who had come on business with Mr. Williams. He was pursued, overtaken, and shot. Mr. Vaughn was the next place we visited, and after murdering the family here, I determined on starting from Jerusalem. Our numbers amounted now to 40 or 60, all mounted and armed with guns, axes, swords, and clubs. On reaching Mr. James W. Parker's gate, immediately on the road leading to Jerusalem and about 3 miles distant, it was proposed to me to call them, but I objected, as I knew he was gone to Jerusalem, and my object was to reach there as soon as possible. But some of the men having revelations at the Parkers, it was agreed that they might call and get his people. I remained at the gate on the road with 7 or 8, the others going across the field to the house, about half a mile off. After waiting some time for them, I became impatient and started to the house for them.
On their return, they were met by a party of white men who had pursued their bloodstained track, and who had fired on the house, and who had fired on those at the gate and dispersed them, which Nat knew nothing of, not having been at the time rejoined by any of them.
Immediately on discovering the whites, I ordered my man to halt and form, as they appeared to be alarmed. The white men, 18 in number, approached us in about 100 yards when one of them fired.
This was against the positive orders of Captain Alexander P. Peet, who commanded, and who had directed his men to reserve their fire until within 30 paces.
They were not killed. Wait a minute. Oh, and and okay. And I discovered about half of them retreating. I then ordered my man to fire and rush on them, and the few remaining stood their ground until we approached within 50 yards, when they fired and retreated. We pursued and overtook some of them who we thought were left dead.
They were not killed.
Okay. After pursuing them about 200 yards and rising a little hill, I discovered they were met by another party and had halted and were reloading their guns.
This was a small party from Jerusalem who knew the Negroes were in the field and had just tied their horses to await their return to the road, knowing that Mr. Parker and family were in Jerusalem, but knew nothing of the party that had gone in with Captain Pete. On hearing the firing, they immediately rushed to the spot and arrived just in time to arrest the progress of these barbarous villains and save the lives of their friends and fellow citizens.
Thinking that those who retreated first and the party who fired on us at 50 or 60 yard distance had all fallen back to meet others with ammunition. As I saw them reloading their guns and more coming up than I saw at first, and several of my bravest men being wounded, the others became panic struck and squandered over the field. The white man pursued and fired on us several times. Hart had his horse shot under him, and I caught another from him for him as it was running by me. 5 or 6 of my men were wounded, but none left on the field. Finding myself defeated here, I instantly determined to go through a private way and cross the Nottoway River at Cypress Bridge, 3 miles below Jerusalem, and attack that place in the rear. As I expected, they would look for me on the other road, and I had a great desire to get there to procure arms and ammunition. After going a short distance in this private way, accompanied by about 20 men, I overtook 2 or 3 who told me the others were dispersed. Is that dispersed? Despised.
Dispersed.
Dispersed. Dispersed in every direction. After trying in vain to collect a sufficient force to proceed to Jerusalem, I determined to return, as I was sure they would make back to their old neighborhoods, where they would rejoin me, make new recruits, and come down again. On my way back, I called at Mr. Thomas, Mrs. Spencer, and several other places. The white families have fled. We found no more victims to satisfy our thirst for blood. We stopped at Mr. Wrigley's quarters for the night, and being joined by 4 of his men, which the recruits made since my defeat, we mustered now about 40 strong. That looked like mastered. We mustered now about 40 strong after placing out guards. I laid down to sleep, but was quickly roused by a great racket starting up. I found some mounted and others in great confusion. One of the guards, having given the alarm that we were about to be attacked, I ordered some to ride round and scout, and on their return, the others, being more alarmed, not knowing who they were, fled in different ways, so that I was reduced to about 20 again. With this, I determined to attempt to recruit and proceed on to rally in the neighborhood I had left. Dr. Blunt was the nearest house, which we reached just before day of riding up the yard. Hart fired a gun. We expected Dr. Blunt and his family were at Major Wrigley's, as I knew there was a company of men there. The gun was fired to ascertain to ascertain if the family were at home. We were immediately fired upon and retreated, leaving several of my men. I do not know what became of them, as I never saw them afterwards. Pursuing our course back and coming in sight of Captain Harris, where we'd been the day before, we discovered the party of white men in the house, on which all deserted me but two, Jacob and Nat. We concealed ourselves in the woods and in woods until near night, when I sent them in search of Henry, Sam, Nelson, and Hart, and directed them to rally all they could at the place we had our dinner the Sunday before, where they would find me, and I accordingly returned there as soon as it was dark, and remained until Wednesday evening, when discovering white men riding around the place as though they were looking for someone, and none of my men joining me, I concluded Jacob and Nat had been taken and compelled to betray me. On this, I gave up all hope for the present, and on Thursday night, after having supplied myself with provisions from Mr. Travis's, I scratched a hole under a pile of fence rails in a field, where I concealed myself for 6 weeks, never leaving my hiding place, but for a few minutes in the dead of night to get water, which was very near. Thinking by this time I could venture out, I begun to go about in the night and eavesdrop the houses in the neighborhood. Pursuing this course for about a fortnight and gathering little to no intelligence, afraid of speaking to any human being, and returning every morning to my cave before the dawn of day, I knew not how long I might have led this life, if accident had not betrayed me. A dog in the neighborhood passing by my hiding place one night while I was out by some was attacked by
Attracted.
was attracted by I don't know what's going on with me today in this reading. Seriously.
It's just one of those days.
Yeah, it really is. Was attracted by some meat I had in my cave and crawled in and stole it, and was coming out just as I returned a few nights later. Two Negroes, having started to go hunting with the same dog and passed that way, the dog came again to the place, and having just gone out to walk about discovered me and barked. Poof. On which, thinking myself discovered, I spoke to them to beg concealment. On making myself known, they fled from me. Knowing then they would betray me, I immediately left my hiding place and was pursued almost instantaneously, until I was taken a fortnight afterwards by Mr. Benjamin Phipps in a little hole I had dug out with my sword for the purpose of concealment under the top of a fallen tree.
It's pursued almost incessantly.
What?
You said instantaneously, and it's incessantly. Pursued almost incessantly.
Pursued almost incessantly, until I was taken a fortnight afterwards by Mr. Benjamin Phipps in a little hole I had dug out with my sword from the purpose of concealment under the top of a fallen tree.
On Mr. Phipps discovering the place of his concealment, he cocked his gun and aimed at Nat.
Don't shoot.
Your sword, boy.
I delivered it to him, and he brought me to prison. During this time I was pursued. I had many hell-breath escapes, which your time will not permit you to relate. I am here loaded with chains and willing to suffer the fate that awaited me.
I here proceeded to make some inquiries of him, after assuring him of the certain death that awaited him, and that concealment would only bring destruction on the innocent as well as guilty of his own color, if he knew of any extensive or concerted plan. His answer was,
Nope.
when I questioned him as to the insurrection in North Carolina happening about the same time, he denied any knowledge of it, and when I looked him in the face as though I would search his innermost thoughts, he replied,
I see you, sir, doubt my words, but can you not think the same ideas and strange appearances about this time in the heavens might prompt others as well as myself to this undertaking.
I now had much conversation with and asked him many questions, having forborne to do so previously, except in the cases noted in parenthesis. But during his statement, I had, unnoticed by him, taken notice to some particular circumstances, and, having the advantage of his statement before me in writing, on the evening of the third day that I had been with him, began to cross-examination, and found his statement corroborated by every circumstance coming within my own knowledge, or the confessions of others whom had been either killed or executed, and whom he had not seen or had any knowledge since the 22nd of August last. He expressed himself fully satisfied as to the impracticability of the attempt. It has been said that he was ignorant and cowardly, and that his object was to murder and rob for the purpose of obtaining money to make his escape. It is notorious that he was never known to have a dollar in his life, or swear an oath, or drink a drop of spirits. As to his ignorance, he certainly never had the advantages of education, but he can read and write. It was taught him by his parents, and for natural intelligence and quickness of apprehension is surpassed by few men I have ever seen. As to his being a coward, his reason as given for not resisting Mr. Phipps shows the decision of his character. When he saw Mr. Phipps present his gun, he said he knew it was impossible for him to escape, as the woods were full of men. He therefore thought it was better to surrender and trust to fortune for his escape. He is a complete fanatic who plays the part most admirably. On other subjects, he possesses an uncommon share of intelligence, with a mind capable of attaining anything, but warped and perverted by the influence of early impressions. He is below the ordinary stature, though strong and active, having the true Negro face, every feature of which is strongly marked. I shall not attempt to describe the effect of his narrative, as told and commented on by himself in the condemned hole of the prison. The calm, deliberate composure with which he spoke of his late deeds and intentions, the expression of his fiend-like face when excited by enthusiasm, still bearing the stains of the blood of helpless innocents about him. Clothed with rags and covered with chains, yet daring to raise his manacled hands to heaven, with the spirit soaring above the attributes of man, I looked on him and my blood curdled in my veins. I will not shock the feelings of humanity, nor wound afresh the bosoms of the disconsolate sufferers in this unparalleled and inhuman massacre, by detailing the deeds of their fiend-like barbarity. There were 2 or 3 who were in the power of these wretches, had they known it, and who escaped in the most providential manner. There were 2 whom they thought they left dead on the field at Mr. Parker's, but who were only stunned by the blows of the guns, as they did not take time to reload when they charged on them. The escape of a little girl who went to school at Mr. Waller's, and where the children were collecting for that purpose, excited a general sympathy. As their teacher had not arrived, they were at play in the yard, and seeing the Negroes approach, she ran up on a dirt chimney, such as are common to log houses, and remained there unnoticed during the massacre of the 11 that were killed in this place. The 11 that were killed at this place. She remained on her hiding place till just before the arrival of a party who were in pursuit of the murderers, when she came down and fled to a swamp, where, a mere child as she was, with the horrors of the late scene before her, she lay concealed until the next day, when, seeing a party go up to the house, she came up, and, on being asked how she escaped, replied, with the utmost simplicity, "The Lord helped her." She was taken up behind a gentleman of the party, and returned to the arms of her weeping mother. Miss White had concealed herself between the bed and mat that supported it, while they murdered her sister in the same room, without discovering her. She was afterwards carried off and concealed for protection by a slave of the family, who gave evidence against several of them on their trial. Mrs. Nathaniel Francis, while concealed in a closet, heard their blows and the shrieks of the victims of these ruthless savages. They then entered the closet where she was concealed and went out without discovering her. While in this hiding place, she heard 2 of her women in a quarrel about the division of her clothes. Mr. John T. Barron, discovering them approaching his house, told his wife to make her escape, and, scorning to fly, fell fighting on his own threshold. After firing his rifle, he discharged his gun at them, and then broke it over the villain who first approached him. But he was overpowered and slain. His bravery, however, saved from the hands of those monsters his lovely and amiable wife, who will long lament a husband so deserving of her love. As directed by him, she attempted to escape through the garden when she was caught and held by one of her servant girls. But another, coming to her rescue, she fled to the woods and concealed herself. Few indeed were those who escaped their work of death, but fortunate for society, the hand of retributive justice has overtaken them, and not one that it was known to be concerned has escaped.
Ha ha, bosoms.
Hello, nurse.
Oh, let me order this food so I can go pick it up before I go. If they have it ready in time before I go. Is Gino's open?
I don't know.
I don't either. That's what I'm asking.
Oh, dear.
Thanks, Greg. That helped me a lot.
That got me started with Juneteenth. So that was in the late 90s.
That didn't help me at all, by the way. I'm just being facetious.
I noticed.
I can be an ass when I want to.
June what?
And you better not say I know.
Right now, some 20-something years later.
What's wrong with agreeing with you?
You know what? Yeah, I need new stuff too. Trust me.
You are also a board member of Juneteenth.
Okay.
We need to get these buttons resewn.
Yeah, okay.
Things,
Onion rings and
Yes.
the tender, so I'll need to order that
It is,
now.
National Juneteenth Observation Festival. Foundation. National Juneteenth Observation Foundation. Founded by the late Dr. Ronald B. Myers, who was a medical doctor as well as a Baptist. And he was a life force bigger than life. He was quite, big guy. And he played the trumpet, and he, as I say, he was also a jazz musician, a minister, a medical doctor, and of course, a huge force in the country, getting proclamations and resolutions from every state of the union. At this point, every state in the union except for Hawaii, of all places, it has a Juneteenth proclamation, or resolution, or it's indeed a state holiday, as it has recently